Welcome to CEO Now. My name is Lars Ep, and today I'm together with Andrea Kates, directly from San Francisco. So welcome, Andrea.
Thanks, Lars.
And today I would like to discuss the fit between making strategy in a more traditional sense compared to all your knowledge about innovation and how to get into your next. So welcome.
Thanks. I'm excited. It's my favorite topic.
It is?
It is.
Oh, because I can see a lot of executive and top executives are discussing how to work with strategy in this time with uncertainties and difficulties and rapid change. And just last week, I heard your webinar where you were talking about getting to next 6 principles of innovation. But how do you believe that fits together with a traditional way of thinking strategy?
Well, the reason this is my favorite topic, and I think the one that no one's really talking about very much these days, and I think it warrants a lot more conversation, is that the dirty little secret about innovation and strategy is that they do not live well in the same house. The other thing that I think is part of that dirty little secret is that, to be honest, I have been in rooms where there's senior executives in a company and they've just had an innovation workshop. You walk in the room and there's all the little Post-it notes all over the walls, and everybody's had a great time. They had a hackathon. They had a bunch of people with ideation sessions, and I have heard this said time after time. The executives walk in and say, "Okay, that was great. Now let's get back to business."
To business, yes. And by that you mean traditional business.
By that I mean that there's a lot of cynicism around the payback for innovation. And so what I think happens is that there's people who are like, yeah, that was all fun and games, but now we actually have to earn some money.
Yes. I heard a sentence, but actually from China, with Alibaba. And he said that if you want to do something new, it will take 10 years. And I believe that could also conflict between traditional short-term thinking. You have to earn money, you have to increase your profit, and then you also have to create changes. And perhaps some of the changes, you won't see them or not benefit from them before in 10 years.
Right. Well, I think that one of the thinkers I like the most in this area is not actually my own view. It's Gary Pisano at Harvard who talked a couple of years ago about an innovation strategy. So there had been just innovation, there has been strategy, but an innovation strategy where a lot of people have a 2x2 matrix of bottom left, bottom right, top left, top right. And his characterization has stuck with me for a couple of years and inspired a refinement on it. His thought was that, sure, there's innovation that can happen at all the quadrants of your strategy, but they're different. And people get really mixed up. They'll want to have like a hackathon around something that's a long-term, moonshot. Yeah. Or they'll want to have something that's really creative around something that really just really requires innovative technology to refine something that you're already quite good at. I remember I was working with Intel, and there was, this conversation around if you just make the current chip do a slightly different thing, you can be very successful in your company. You don't have to go into moonshots necessarily. No. But then you have groups that have to do other, the longer term view for your company. So what I think is important for our conversation today is this notion of a portfolio. The teams don't have to understand the portfolio context of what they're doing, but leadership does.
Yes, so there's a difference. But I also believe that when you address this one about the portfolio, that's a leadership discipline. So the CEOs, the executives, should know exactly what we are talking about.
That's right.
But then again, it will conflict, because how often have you seen that the CEOs take ownership for this development?
Right. So I've seen this in a couple of ways, and it usually involves someone shutting the door and saying, "Can we have a private conversation?" And here's how it goes. They shut the door and they say, "Andrea, can we have a private conversation?" And I'm talking about Fortune 50 company, huge, that brings 3 products per day, 3 SKUs per day to market. Yeah. And I say, basically, so how do you keep track of all these? How do you decide where to place your bets? And they say, well, we've got this big spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And it has multi-factors and, multivariate analysis and all these different factors. And I said, God, that's really complicated. How do you know that's the right approach? And they always close the door and say, we don't know.
No.
Right? So there's this fear at the executive level that's consistent that has to do with not knowing where to place your bets, not knowing how to de-risk things, not being able to predict the future because we can't. And so my answer to this is, number one, as we said earlier, portfolio view. Really having some good ways of attaching characteristics to the different types of innovation that you have in the pot.
Yeah.
They're not all the same. You shouldn't do the same things to everything. Like if you have different types of dough, some are going to be a pastry and some are going to be a taco and some are going to be a loaf of bread. And you do one of them, you roll, one of them you place in the oven. You have different things that you do with different with the doughs. To me, there's the portfolio piece, and then there's also the ability to accelerate progress in different ways.
So that's the way. But if I think about, I saw that last year at Thinkers 50, there was nominating Roger Martin as number one. So, and he is a strategy guy. And in 2013, he launched the book, Playing to Win, how strategy really works, more like a game. But what I like about it was that he said strategy is all about making choices. But at the same time, by making a strategy, you can increase your chances for success, but you can't guarantee it. So when you're talking about people also working with this spreadsheet and so on, are there any way to make a portfolio leadership or management where you can guarantee success, or can you just increase the chances for success?
Well, I'll say two things. Number one is what I love about Roger Martin's work, because I'm a big fan of his, and I think that what he does really well is contextual strategy. So with a context in his line of what must be true, is really a good framing, because let's imagine Amazon. It's a great example. If they say, oh, well, right now I'm making this very simple. Imagining they say, oh, we sell books and we mail them to people, and we take orders on the internet. Great. What if what must be true if we wanted to expand into refrigeration, into lettuce? It's like, well, we can't do that. That would be one approach. We can't do that. We don't know. We don't have any refrigerated trucks, right? We don't have any trucks that have refrigerators. Therefore, that's not our core competency. That's old-fashioned thinking, right? And therefore, it's not in our competitive advantage. This is the old way we were taught. Yeah. And therefore, stick to our knitting. Don't go into lettuce and groceries. Just stick with the books and things like shoes. So you could go to Zappos, but you'd never go into groceries, right? What Roger would say, I believe, if we can ask him, is what must be true? Yeah. What would have to be true for us to be able to seize that market opportunity? And then you have to do your homework. You have to figure out what it would cost for refrigeration trucks. It's not just sticky notes on the wall. It's literally doing your homework about the unknown, and that's where I think people don't know how to study the unknown.
No.
For strategy.
No, but that's actually a way to do it, and I actually also like it, and I just love Roger Martin's way of thinking, because then you construct your own reality view. So you say, what have to be right? Then you start to assume what have to be right, and you can test that.
That's right. And the Andrea Kates version of that is what I call, there's this thing called predictive analytics, where and I've worked in a lot of companies, including companies that were quite arrogant, where we would say, oh, the geniuses in London know the perfect algorithm. Okay. And whenever somebody says that, I start laughing. It's like there's no genius that can predict the future. So predictive analytics is important for some aspects of things, certainly technology. But I have something that I've coined a phrase called suggestive analytics, where you can frame a proxy around certain characteristics of what would have to be true, and you have these suggestive analytics that are clearly, you can't say it will be true, but if you go into refrigeration, if you model something in a way that you've suggested might be the case, you can at least develop some pilots to see if your early ideas have merit.
Yeah, but ain't there a way you're going to use the lean startup way of thinking? You're going into the discovery, making some pilots, and then trying to test it, but you do it small scale?
Yeah, you can do that in some of the areas, but I would also say that in some areas, you might do an acquisition. You might not do a lean startup at all. As I said, to me, a portfolio view, let's imagine, there are 3 different questions I've been asked recently. One, large healthcare company said, do you have an algorithm that can tell us which of the 100 microbiome projects that we have on the books is the one we should fund? And I said, there's no algorithm. There have to be humans involved.
Yeah.
Because each one has conditions, right?
Yes.
Then there are people who ask the question, we have 500 ideas that have come out of our design thinking boot camp. We have 500 ideas. Which one should we do? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that people have now. It's what I call a sophisticated set of problems, because it used to be that you didn't have any ideas.
Yeah.
But now we have 500.
Yes.
And so now the role of leadership is not to encourage new ideas only, but it's also to have this portfolio view of context.
You're using that sense more than once. Portfolio way of context.
Yes.
So could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let's imagine that I'll use Intel, although this is, just an example,
yes.
right? So, and this isn't anything proprietary. Of course, I would never share that, in public. But, you have on the bottom left the projects that are, sort of incremental. And Gary Pisano would say that those are, you keep your same business model and you keep your same technology. You don't need to have a whole new set of people coming in, right? So that's bottom left quadrant. That's incremental, but still innovative. And you can make tons of money doing that, right?
Yeah.
You can improve current products, et cetera. The bottom right would be one where, like we said before, it's Amazon going into refrigeration.
Yeah.
You have a new competency, which is refrigeration, but the same business model. You're shipping a thing that people buy on the internet, but it has to be refrigerated.
Yes.
On the top left, you have a new business model and a new capability, right? So, for instance, that's where I was working with an energy company that was in traditional oil and gas. And suddenly they realized if they wanted to go into a new way of extracting energy, they had to get new engineers who knew something about that. So they needed like a new technical capability. And they also needed a new distribution, because they wanted to have an end-to-end service, not just here's your product. So a product and a service is a different business model. And they needed both a new business model and new technology. The top right is in the portfolio would be things that are longer term or more, not necessarily. I don't like H1, H2, H3, which is one of the ways people characterize this. Well, because H3 never happens. It's Horizon 3 is always in the future.
Yes.
Actually, I would say that Amazon Web Services is a great example of this top quadrant, where it's a different technical capability and a different business model, and it requires a fundamental shift in what it's very far removed from Amazon selling books online.
Yeah.
And yet a damn good idea.
I believe when I hear that, it reminds me about we also have another teacher at our MBA faculty, Joanne Highland, talking about corporate entrepreneurship, and she tried to teach people when you're talking about breakthrough innovation and when you're just talking about product development. So, because it's the uncertainties and how to deal with the uncertainties in that scale or continuum.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that people have to think in continuums. And I also think, though, that if we think of traditional strategy and we think of the way that innovation has now started to mature, there are some places where people haven't connected the dots yet for the leaders. And this is, in my opinion, why there's a little bit of pushback, right? The strategic-minded people are afraid that the children have come into the company and they're jumping around and having a blast and having hackathons and we'll never control these people. And the Gen X or whatever that they're afraid of, right? the people who are innovators are looking at the strategists and saying, you're not moving fast enough, you're not seeing the world the way it's becoming. You're asking me for predictive analytics when all I can give you is suggestive analytics.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like fuzzy logic versus absolute logic. And, there's a distrust between the two mindsets. And to me, that's what holds a lot of companies back.
Yeah. Do you have some good recommendation for that?
Oh, yeah.
How to work with it in a process? And I'm sure because I also heard Peter Drucker say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that could also be a situation here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that's happening, as I said, there's a movement now, especially from the lean startup movement, as we've gone into large companies, because I've been doing a combination of lean, startup, and strategy for maybe, 6 years now.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, there's a coming together of these mindsets when someone says, like I was saying earlier, okay, now we have 16 viable ideas. There are 16 possible ways that we could bring new products or offerings to market. Which one should we choose?
Yeah.
And that's where people like me, an outsider has to still come in and help broker the conversation between the different mindsets within a company.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard for companies to do that themselves.
Yeah. So then use help from the outside to facilitate this kind of process.
Absolutely. I mean, because it's two different mindsets. One is the mindset that's execution, and one is the mindset that's discovery and search.
Yes. And you have to find a balance.
Yeah, there's a and also here's what I think is what's been done incorrectly is not having everyone's perspective respected, right? So the innovators need to be equally respected to the quote traditional strategic. Yeah. And that's where right now I believe we're in the era of brokering the conversations. And that's where as I said, when you have a portfolio conversation, different parties need to come to the table and have different metrics. You can't hold innovation to the same metrics as existing companies, existing businesses. You have to look at all 4 quadrants of your portfolio and make sure that you have enough of a percentage of AWS, Amazon Web Services types of future projects. And you also have to make sure that you're not vulnerable to outsiders who aren't even in your space yet, especially in machine learning and AI. Yeah. It gives a lot of advantages to small companies. So that kind of perspective, I think, is really hard to do without a bit of brokering of different mindsets.
Brokering, but it could be both internally. So the brokering internally between departments, skills and so on. But it could also be a part of the co-creation together with people from outside, consultants, business networks. So you have many, many different ways of doing it.
Yeah. I didn't mean to sound like a commercial for consultants because I actually think there's a lot of them that, a lot of companies that should probably do this themselves. I think the reason is that it's almost like you need a translator.
Yeah.
A real objective translator between the perspectives and points of view of the status quo, which is very important for an existing company. By the way, doesn't exist in a startup, right? You don't have anybody trying to keep status quo in a startup. There's no investment in that, right? And the part that sees the future, this new thing is coming, and if we don't get ahead of it, somebody else will. Yeah. Those are 2 different mindsets.
Yes. At the last part here, I have one question. It's more when I'm thinking about Roger Martin's book, Playing to Win, How Strategy Really Works. He have those 5 stages, winning aspiration, where to play, how to win, as I see more like your market fit, what you're going to do, where you're going to play. But then stage 4 is the capabilities. So I'm still wondering a little bit if companies are critical enough. So one aspect is I can find a way with help in projects. Then we can figure out what should be the winning aspiration. We could find out where to play and how to win. But sometimes, with my experience, companies and executives forget to ask the questions, but do we have the capabilities to do so? And you also gave some examples that you need new engineers and so on. What is your experience in that area?
So that's actually a great perspective, Lars, because I think that the answer has been incorrect in two different ways. Sometimes people say that's not something we could ever do, and then people miss it. So saying, well, we're not in the blank. We're not in the mobile market. We're not experienced in whatever. Let me tell you that the machine learning and AI stuff that this one company that I've been working with has mastered is, it's just amazing, and it's going to leapfrog them beyond any of the traditional people. They're in the clothing industry.
Okay.
And, there's nothing that Zara, H&M, and Bestseller can do compared with the analytics of this one company. I just feel like they decided that they were going to master something hard. No, it wasn't in their core capabilities, but they hired it because they knew they needed it.
Yeah. Or they can acquire it.
That's right. You can acquire it. And so there's a financial company that I was telling you was working on blockchain. They acquired a small startup in Paris because they knew that there was an early sign that this blockchain was going to be a very important new skill. So they acquired it. They knew, no, it's not in their capability. And I think traditional strategy has been that you might have crossed off an option if it's like, well, we're not in that. We don't have that capability. Now it's like, well, you damn well better get it.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking time for this discussion about strategy and innovation. Thank you. Thank you.